I also had some really strong male figures in my grandparents and stuff. I mean, one was a cattle rancher, one was a farmer, and by definition, they were kind of self-sufficient and kind of entrepreneurs. And I had a lot of that going on, and my dad was a product of that. So I had some really good male archetypes, but that was definitely something that happened. So look, I don't know if you see anything there. I definitely you have to send me an invoice for the therapy session as well, Connor, after this.
Well, you better be careful, Brian. Well, we're just scratching the surface. I mean, no, I think what you're saying is very applicable, and it's cool to hear the journey. And I think I really appreciate the transparency and how candid you are with it. And our fathers have a very big role in our life, and I think that a lot of men try and discount the impact that they've had, and try and sort of brush it under the rug. It's like, no, it wasn't a big deal. And or it really was a big deal, but only when I was whatever, 7 or 3 or 12. And it's like, well, yeah, but that 7 or 3 or 12-year-old is still inside of you, and if you haven't dealt with that part and you haven't found a resolution to it like you have, and gone on some type of journey to understand the impact that it actually had, then the impact is going to show up, and it will influence your life and your behaviors and your relationships in ways that you do not like or understand. And so, Jung had this great quote where he said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. Well, in some ways, what he was talking about is the pain that we have from our youth that we didn't comprehend and understand at that time. And that pain that we have in our childhood, unless we begin to understand it when we are more mature and we have the cognitive ability to sift through it and we have the emotional intelligence to be able to process through it, then it will influence and impact the way that we show up in finances, in our health, in our relationships, sexually, in all of those areas. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a very important part. And, I think for me, maybe the last thing I'll say is I was very fortunate to have had elder men in my life. Like my grandfather fought in World War II, phenomenal man, just like a really wild character. Like there's this book that I've referred to before called Iron John by this guy named Robert Bly. It's sort of a staple within the men's work field. He was part of the mythopoetic men's movement back in like the 80s and 90s. And in the book, there's this wild man named Iron John. There's this wild man that kind of comes out. And my grandfather was totally the embodiment of that. This wiry, super, super strong, piercing, blue-eyed, like kind of, just kind of kooky sometimes. He's like kind of kooky. I remember coming out one morning and he's standing there. He's got his cup of coffee. He's in his Fruit of the Looms underwear. There's a big window that overlooks the road. And he's just standing there doing calf raises at like 6 o'clock in the morning, sipping his coffee in his underwear as people walk their dog outside, and that was just him. Like he just didn't really care. He was sort of unapologetic. He was who he was. And he taught me a lot. I mean, he taught me how to shave, change the oil in the car, how to mow a lawn, how to fix the lawn, like those types of things. And I've been fortunate because the mentors in my life have always sort of been in that age range. After I hit rock bottom, I had a mentor of mine named Bernard who was in his early 70s, and I spent 2 years working with him, and I paid him when I could. He taught me Jungian psychology, and I sort of studied with him and apprenticed with him in like a very old school way. And when I was broke because I was young and didn't have any money, I would chop wood and I would help him with his asparagus farm. And it was this very old school type of apprenticeship that we don't really have today. And I've had a number of those mentors in my life where I've been fortunate to have this sort of old school experience-based apprenticeship that I think we as men really long for deep in our core. We crave for this type of, however we want to call it, nourishment, teaching, It's in the arc of almost every hero story where he finds the sage, older, wise man that teaches him how to wield a sword or go to battle, or a skill that becomes sort of at the forefront of his being and helps him alchemize some of the crap that he's been dealing with. And that is where a lot of young men are, in my opinion, is that they have a pain inside of them and they don't know how to deal with it, or they have an intensity inside of them and they don't know how to deal with it. And there's no one really around saying, this is how you can direct or navigate that intensity that lives inside of you. It's like the first line in my book is, a man's work begins with pain. Man's work begins with pain. Because if you don't know what to do with your pain as a man, it will run your life. It will absolutely run your life and your relationships. And so we have to do a better job of, as men, and I think you've done a good job of it with your show in many ways, of bringing on men to tell their stories and to talk about their journeys and say, this is how I dealt with my pain, with my shit, for lack, the clinical term. So yeah.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff there. I had some grandpas that were big in my life. And so if I now look back at these guests on London Real that have been my mentors and the ones I've learned from, a lot of them are in that age group. Then that's probably not a coincidence, is it, Connor? And I find myself sometimes, I can see it while it's happening. So like, Robert Kiyosaki, author of Rich Dad Poor Dad, is probably one of those figures in my life. I still sometimes have to pinch myself that I get to hang out with him and spend time with him because he's such a legend. But I'm also really comfortable with that older man relationship, because my grandpa had it, and my grandpa was in a wheelchair, and I would kind of learn from him, but also take care of him, but also learn from him, but help him in the car, but then sit there and listen when he would tell me how to do a horse trade, or, I could see him, and he was a successful rancher and entrepreneur, and I can see a lot. And so it's weird. I've attracted a lot of those relationships with this show, because this show is like my life, not even to the power of 10, to the power of 100, because I'll just attract these people.
How do you get out of a rat race? How do you create wealth not only for yourself, but also for the generations to come after?
I am absolutely amazed with the quality of companies that we're getting exposure to.
We go on to Zoom calls with the innovators and the folks who are building new applications in metaverse, blockchain, artificial intelligence, decentralized finance.
What's going on, everybody? Thumbs up if you can see me.
We are focusing on early stage investment.
And the quality of people that we're getting exposure to, whether it be Dan Tapiero with 1RT, Jason Ma from Open, Yatsu from Animoca.
It's been a phenomenal experience thus far. It has far exceeded my expectations.
We are focusing on cutting edge technologies.
I view it now as the best investment I've ever made. The upside, I view, is unlimited.
And as a retail investor, I would never get this exposure anywhere else outside of Investment Club.
See you in the Investment Club.